I find this entire situation surrounding The Last of Us Part 2 simultaneously hilarious and extremely frustrating. I think it's symptomatic of the state of the gaming industry in 2020, when this controversy has a little bit of everything you would expect at this point. We have an atmosphere of political controversy surrounding the game. There are a lot of fans of the first game who are not happy with the direction Naughty Dog are taking. We have internal leaks not only of the actual plot of the game, but also of the terrible working conditions at the studio. And of course, we have the demonization of gamers by the press as usual. And I think this backlash has actually been kind of brewing for a while, especially since the first few trailers dropped. And it became very clear that the developers are looking to politicize this sequel in a way more overt fashion than the first game. Not to say that the first game was apolitical. I mean, there were a lot of moments of, I guess you could call it, feminist empowerment fantasies, especially with characters like Tess and Marlene, who both seem to fit the trope that we see all the time these days of badass, cold-blooded killer women. And obviously Ellie as a character is a non-sexualized female character, and Druckmann would, he would opine endlessly about his virtuous intentions in writing this character. But if you just put Druckmann on mute and just actually experience the game, a lot of that stuff was, in the background, and I personally didn't find the character of Ellie a kind of highly politicized character. She wasn't obnoxious at all. And I actually find it very disappointing how the devs have committed to the shoehorning in of their own personal politics into this sequel, when the original really wasn't like that. It was a very stripped down, brutal, realistic story about survival, but it also had this heart to it, which was the father and daughter relationship, or at least surrogate daughter of Joel and Ellie. So that was kind of like the main appeal of the game for me anyway. I loved the first Last of Us. I played it once on the PS3 when it came out. I played it again when it was remastered for PS4. And I played it a third time on one of the hardest difficulties. So really, it takes a lot for a game to make me commit to it to that degree. And I think it was that father-daughter aspect that really appealed to me. It gave the game that very authentic human quality that you could really relate to. That's why I love the first one. But the thing with this sequel is it became very clear to me after watching the first couple of trailers that this kind of, feminist empowerment type of theme that the first game may have had kind of going on in the background is now taking center stage. And along with it, Druckmann is kind of injecting in a lot of his other personal and ideological views and his very left-wing and subversive worldview, where he has a big chip on his shoulder about masculinity in this game, to the point where he actually consulted with Anita Sarkeesian during the script writing process. And also, just based on his depiction of Christians in this game, hilariously, excuse me, Mr. Druckmann, but you are an Israeli citizen, are you not? Anyway, not that there's any kind of relation to those two things. But yes, Christians are horrifying homophobes who hunt down the LGBTQ protagonist of this game relentlessly. And speaking of which, it kind of brings us to the crux of the controversy regarding these leaks. And heads up for spoilers, just in case you don't want to have that spoiled for you, but it turns out that one of the main characters, the playable characters, is actually a trans individual. Now, I'm not sure which way we're going here. I think it could be male to female, possibly female to male. It's really difficult to tell because of Druckmann's commitment to sucking out all femininity from this game whatsoever, at least natural femininity. He's literally been quoted as saying that he made the female characters less feminine intentionally to both counter the male gaze and also to make the game more appealing to the trans community. And one of the ways he's achieved this is by putting you in control of this hulking trans character who proceeds to beat the absolute shit out of both Joel and Ellie. And as far as I know, I think Z actually ends up killing Joel, the main protagonist of the first game. And one of the cool things about Joel's character was there was this ambiguity around whether or not was he truly a virtuous man? Was he justified in committing this brutal killing spree to save Ellie's life? All of that kind of goes out the window here when we as the player are now forced to murder Joel. And I can tell what he's going for. It's that it's time for, the white patriarchal male of Joel, it's time for him to die, right? I can't be the only one who kind of is left with a bad taste in their mouth going into this game, knowing just how mean-spirited Druckmann's point of view really is, where instead of giving Ellie a chance to maybe learn more about why Joel killed all those people and kind of understanding that he was a father, he loved his daughter, he lost his daughter. That's what the whole first game was about. He didn't want to lose another daughter. But now in the sequel, Druckmann is forcing us to retroactively judge Joel as what? An evil patriarch who needs to have his head caved in with a golf club by a hilariously muscular trans woman. This is the situation that we find ourselves in right now. And that's the reason why I think justifiably there are fans who they didn't want this. What kind of sequel is this? Like, Druckmann's excuse is that he is obviously an artiste, because that's what a good story is. A good story, according to Druckmann, is a total subversion of all expectations to the point where you can't even really enjoy the game. It's just this hate-filled, awful, kind of just inverted nightmare. I mean, and the first game was pretty nihilistic in a kind of teenage philosophy student kind of way, but this really is beyond the pale. I mean, he's taken the subversion up to 11 here, to the point where even like a flawed character like Joel still had an element of positive masculinity to him. After all, he was the protector of Ellie, right? But in this game, no. He has to be murdered by a trans person because that's a statement. We're making a political statement. And fuck you if you don't really enjoy playing that scene, because you're not supposed to enjoy it, shitlord, alright? Have you ever heard about art, okay? And it's interesting to note that before the Druckmann era at Naughty Dog, one of the company's best writers was actually a woman, Amy Hennig. And she was responsible for writing a lot of the Uncharted games. And before that, she actually wrote one of my favorite games of all time, which was Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver. Absolute classic. So this woman has been in the industry for a long time. And it's interesting to note that she never bought into the whole anti-Gamergate narrative of misogyny and, gatekeeping, where it's impossible for women to thrive within the industry. She basically proved that entire narrative false by working her way up to being head writer for Naughty Dog. And of course, games journalists would try and goad her into shitting on the industry, but she always pushed back against that narrative of the industry being inherently sexist. She didn't get forced out of her role at the company by an arch white male Cheeto dust-covered neck-bearded corporate patriarch. She got forced out by Druckmann. And what was his reasoning? Well, her writing wasn't progressive enough. You can see Druckmann's politics really creeping into Naughty Dog's writing through the Last of Us DLC, when he officially retconned Ellie as a lesbian with a black lesbian girlfriend, and he actually ended up throwing out her entire script for Uncharted 4, a series that she's written for since its inception. So I can't help but find it ironic that a self-proclaimed defender of women like Neil Druckmann got one of the most renowned female writers in the industry fucking ousted for not being woke enough. But don't you dare criticize his treatment of the Naughty Dog employees, with his denial of their bonuses while simultaneously paying himself. Don't criticize the ham-fisted insertion of political wedge issues into a fucking video game released by the creators of Crash Bandicoot. Yeah, definitely don't do that. In fact, don't criticize Neil Druckmann for anything. And whatever you do, don't criticize Israel.